In the sun-weathered hills of Montana, where secrets run as deep as mountain roots, wealth and solitude have been Calder Royce's only companions since tragedy claimed his family years ago. The locals whisper about the reclusive rancher who buys struggling properties, not for profit, but to preserve the land's wild spirit. But even Calder wasn't prepared for what he discovered at a small-town auction. A pregnant woman named Maris being sold off like cattle by her calculating in-laws. Under an outdated guardianship agreement, something in her quiet dignity stirred memories he'd fought to bury. With a single bid, he secured her freedom on paper, offering sanctuary on his vast ranch until her baby arrives. Little did he know that in saving her, he was opening the door to his own salvation. What secrets from Maris's past could threaten the delicate peace they've found? The October wind whispered through the failing town of Silver Creek, Montana, rattling the auction notice that had drawn Calder Royce from his self-imposed exile. He stood at the back of the crowd, his tall frame wrapped in a weather-worn duster, studying the proceedings through eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. The Bailey estate sale wasn't his usual type of acquisition. He preferred land deals done through lawyers, clean and impersonal, but something about the peculiar wording in the notice had nagged at him for days. "Next lot," the auctioneer's voice carried across the gathering, heavy with an uncertainty that made Calder's neck prickle. We have a rather unusual item." The man tugged at his collar, glancing nervously at the cluster of well-dressed people to his right. The Bailey family, Calder presumed, though he'd never met them in his 15 years of neighboring their land. That's when he saw her. A young woman, maybe 30, stood slightly apart from the crowd, her hands folded protectively over the gentle swell of her belly. Despite the autumn chill, she wore only a thin dress, yet held herself with a dignity that made the fine clothes of those around her seem gaudy in comparison. Her dark hair caught the morning light, and something about the way she stood, alone but undefeated, stirred memories Calder had buried beneath 15 years of Montana soil. The Bailey estate includes a valid guardianship agreement. The auctioneer continued, his voice strengthening as he found his legal footing. The agreement and all responsibilities therein are transferable to the highest bidder, including... He paused, swallowing hard, including custody of Mrs. Maris Bailey and her unborn child. The crowd's murmur turned to ice in Calder's veins. He'd seen this before in the history books his late wife used to teach from. People sold like property, families torn apart by the pound of a gavel. But this was 2025. And the woman standing there, straight-backed and silent, was not a page in a history book. An image flashed unbidden through his mind. Sarah, his wife, standing in their kitchen 15 years ago, one hand on her swollen belly, the other holding up a small pair of boots she'd bought for their unborn son. Both gone 2 weeks later in a crash that had turned his world to ash. "Opening bid stands at $50,000. The auctioneer announced, and Calder watched the woman, Maris, close her eyes briefly, as if in prayer. The Bailey family patriarch, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, stepped forward. "This is a private family matter," he announced smoothly. "The guardianship agreement was signed by my late son, and as his executors we have every legal right to sell a human being." The words left Calder's mouth before he realized he'd stepped forward. The crowd parted, and for the first time Maris's eyes met his. They were the color of mountain storms, and just as wild. "Mr. Royce," the patriarch's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This doesn't concern you. The agreement is ironclad, signed when my son still lived. His widow requires supervision, especially in her condition." Calder's hand found the checkbook in his pocket, the same one he used to save failing ranches from developers to preserve the wild places that had given him sanctuary after Sarah's death. $1 million, he said quietly, but in the shocked silence, the words rang like thunder. The Bailey patriarch's face purpled. "Now see here, $1 million, Calder repeated, louder this time. for the guardianship agreement and all associated property rights. He met Maris's gaze. Again, saw the faintest tremor in her composed expression. "Do I hear any other bids?" The silence stretched, broken only by the wind and the distant cry of a hawk. The auctioneer's gavel fell like a judgment. "Sold to Mr. Calder Royce." As the paperwork was drawn up, Calder finally approached Maris. Up, close, he could see the slight trembling of her hands, the steel beneath her quiet surface. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice carrying the same dignity as her bearing. "No," he agreed, thinking of Sarah, of chances lost and found. "But I did anyway." He gestured to his truck, parked at the edge of the gathering. "My ranch is about an hour from here. You'll have your own space, complete privacy, and when the baby comes—" He paused, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "You'll be free to go wherever you choose." Something flickered in those storm cloud eyes, hope perhaps, or fear, or both. As they walked to his truck, leaving behind the whispers and the judgment, Calder couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just set in motion something far bigger than a simple auction bid. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of snow and change. And somewhere in the distance, that lonely hawk cried out again. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The county clerk's office smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Calder stood at the counter, his checkbook a weight of responsibility in his hands, while behind him the Bailey patriarch's voice rose like thunder in a drought. "This is absolutely unprecedented." Harrison Bailey III paced the worn linoleum, his Italian leather shoes clicking with each turn. "Sheriff Matthews, surely you can see this is a family matter being corrupted by an outsider." The sheriff, a weathered man who'd served Silver Creek for 3 decades, leaned against the doorframe with deliberate casualness. His hand, however, rested near his holster, a subtle warning Calder didn't miss. "Way I see it, Harrison, you're the ones who made it a public matter by putting it up for auction." Maris stood near the window, sunlight casting her face in profile. She hadn't spoken since leaving the auction site, but her silence carried weight. Every so often, her hand would drift to her belly, a gesture so achingly familiar that Calder had to look away. "The terms are quite clear," the clerk announced, adjusting her reading glasses. "The guardianship agreement, while unusual, was legally recorded. Its transfer through public sale, while ethically questionable, appears technically valid under Montana state law." She looked up, her eyes sharp behind bifocals. "Though I imagine the State Bar Association might have something to say about whoever drew this up." Harrison's son, James Bailey Jr., stepped forward. Unlike his father's bluster, his anger ran cold. "Mrs. Bailey, my brother's widow, is in a delicate condition. The agreement was meant to protect her and our family's interests by selling her." Calder's voice was quiet, but it cut through the office like a blade. "Your brother's been dead less than a year, and you're already trying to cash in on his widow and unborn child. You know nothing about our family situation," Harrison snapped. "Thomas signed that agreement for good reason. Maris is unstable, unpredictable. She needs guidance, structure. She needs freedom," Calder interrupted, signing the cashier's check with a decisive stroke. "And now she has it." The clerk stamped the transfer documents, the sound like a judge's gavel in the tense room. "Mr. Royce now holds all legal rights previously granted under the guardianship agreement." She turned to Maris. "Though I strongly suggest you seek independent legal counsel to review your options for terminating the agreement entirely." For the first time, Maris spoke. Her voice was low, touched with an accent Calder couldn't quite place. "Thank you." Just 2 words, but they carried years of unspoken pain. James took a step toward her, but Sheriff Matthews smoothly intercepted. "I believe we're done here, folks. Mr. Royce, Mrs. Bailey, you're free to go. Harrison, might want to have your lawyer ready. I expect there'll be some questions coming from the state about this whole arrangement." Outside, the autumn air had turned sharp with the promise of early snow. Calder led Maris to his truck, aware of the Bailey family watching. From the courthouse steps, just before she climbed in, Harrison called out, "This isn't over, Maris. That child is a Bailey. You can't just—" "That child," Maris turned, one hand protective over her belly, "is mine. Whatever hold you thought you had over me died with Thomas." Her voice shook slightly, but her spine was steel. "I never asked to be part of your family. Thomas promised me freedom, but you turned his death into another prison." Calder watched something shift in Harrison's expression. Surprise, perhaps, at hearing so many words from a woman they'd tried to silence. Before the old man could respond, Calder started the engine, its rumble drowning out any further threats. They were halfway out of town when Maris spoke again. "Why did you do it? Really?" Calder kept his eyes on the road, where the first few snowflakes were starting to dance. "Because 15 years ago, I couldn't save someone else, and because some things aren't meant to be bought and sold." He felt her studying him, those storm cloud eyes seeing more than he'd shown anyone in years. "Your wife and our unborn son." The words didn't hurt as much as they used to. Sometimes the only way forward is to help someone else find their way. The snow fell harder now, wrapping them in a cocoon of white as they drove toward the ranch. Behind them, Silver Creek and its shadows receded, but Calder couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Baileys weren't the type to let go easily, and he'd just challenged not only their authority, but their entire way of seeing the world. In the passenger seat, Maris began to hum softly. A lullaby, perhaps, for the child she carried, or maybe for herself. The sound merged with the engine's purr and the soft patter of snow, creating a melody of escape, of hope, of possibilities as vast as the Montana sky above them. The snow-dusted road wound through stands of lodgepole pine, each mile drawing them deeper into the wilderness that Calder called home. He'd made this drive countless times, but never with such precious cargo. Beside him, Maris watched the landscape transform, her breath fogging the window as mountains rose like guardians around them. "The gates were my grandfather's doing," Calder said, as they approached the massive iron entrance to the ranch. Twisted metal roses climbed the ancient posts, their craftsmanship hidden beneath years of weather, but still proud. He commissioned them from a Blackfeet artist back in '52, said every sanctuary needs a proper doorway. Maris leaned forward slightly, studying the intricate metalwork. "They're beautiful," she murmured, "like something from a fairy tale." "That's what Sarah said, first time I brought her here." The words slipped out before he could catch them, but somehow they didn't carry their usual sting. "My late wife," he added softly. "She loved this place, said it had healing in its bones." He caught Maris watching him, her expression thoughtful. "And did it? Heal you?" Calder guided the truck through the gates, considering. "It gave me space to breathe. Sometimes that's enough of a start." The drive wound another 2 miles through his property, revealing glimpses of grazing lands, forest, and finally the ranch. House itself, built of local stone and timber, it sprawled along a ridge overlooking a valley where the first settlers had found hot springs bubbling up through limestone. "It's like its own little world," Maris observed, and Calder heard genuine wonder in her voice. "That's the idea. 7,000 acres, most of it wild. The nearest neighbors 5 miles that way," he gestured east, "and the town's about an hour back, as you saw. We've got everything needed to be self-sufficient. Gardens, greenhouse, generator backup, satellite internet." "We?" My ranch manager, Pete, and his wife, Elena. They live in the cottage past the barn. Few seasonal hands, but they're gone till spring calving. He pulled up to the house, killing the engine. "And now you." The snow had picked up, dusting Maris's dark hair as she stepped out of the truck. She turned slowly, taking in the full sweep of the valley, the distant peaks, the way the land seemed to cup the ranch in its palm like something precious. "The guest house is just around back," Calder said, grabbing her small bag, all she'd been allowed to bring from her old life. "It's got its own kitchen, entrance, everything you'd need. Elena stocked it this morning when I called ahead." They followed a flagstone path that curved behind the main house. The guest house was smaller, but built with the same care. A riverside. Cottage transported to the Montana highlands. A curl of smoke rose from its chimney, promising warmth within. Elena lit the fire, Calder explained, fishing out the key. Its brass surface caught the afternoon light, transforming it momentarily into gold. "This is yours," he said, holding it out. "The house, the key, your privacy. They're all yours for as long as you need them." Maris took the key, her fingers trembling slightly. "I haven't had my own key since—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "Thomas's family. They always said I couldn't be trusted. That pregnancy makes women unstable, emotional." "Sounds like they were the unstable ones," Calder said quietly. "Trying to control someone doesn't make you powerful, just makes you afraid." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of wounds carried too long alone. A snowflake landed on Maris's cheek, melting like a tear. "The springs help," Calder found himself saying. "With pregnancy aches, I mean. Sarah used to—" He stopped, surprised again at how easily her name came now. "There's a private pool just there." He pointed to a steaming circle of stone near the guest house. "The Crow people used these waters for healing long before any of us were here." Maris's hand went to her belly, an unconscious gesture he was beginning to recognize. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for this, but for seeing me, really seeing me." Calder nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "Get settled in. Elena left her number on the kitchen counter if you need anything. I'm just up at the main house, but I won't intrude." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Mr. Royce?" "Calder," he corrected gently. "Calder." She stood in her doorway, snowflakes creating a constellation in her dark hair, and for a moment she looked like something from one of Sarah's beloved fairy tales. A princess not in exile, but on the cusp of some great transformation. "I think maybe your wife was right about this place having healing in its bones." He left her there, fitting her key into her own lock for the first time in too long. The snow fell steadily now, erasing their footprints, creating a clean page on which to write whatever came next. From somewhere in the valley, a lone wolf called, a sound not of loneliness, but of wild welcome. The guest house key sat on the kitchen counter, catching the last rays of winter sunlight. Maris touched it occasionally as she moved around the space, as if reassuring herself of its reality. Elena had done more than stock the kitchen. Fresh flowers brightened the windowsill, handmade quilts draped the furniture, and a basket of pregnancy-safe teas waited by a ceramic kettle. A knock at the door made her start, but it was only Elena herself, a woman in her 50s with laugh lines and capable hands. "Thought you might like some company while you get your bearings," she said, holding up a covered dish. "My grandmother's shepherd's pie recipe, good for Montana winters and growing babies." Maris welcomed her in, grateful for the gentle presence. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "Trouble?" Elena smiled, moving naturally to the kitchen to heat their dinner. "Honey, this is the most excitement we've had since that moose wandered into the greenhouse last spring. Besides," she added more softly, "it's nice to see these rooms being used again. Calder built this place for Sarah, you know, for after the baby came." The silence that followed held no expectation, just space for Maris to find her words. "How long were they married?" 7 years. High school sweethearts who found their way back to each other after college. Sarah was a history teacher full of life and stories. She was 6 months along when the accident happened. Elena checked the oven temperature with practiced ease. Calder, he kept her garden for a year afterward, then let it go wild, threw himself into saving other people's land instead of dealing with his own grief. Maris moved to the window, watching snow gather on the window box. "The Baileys never let me garden. Said it wasn't proper for Thomas's wife to dig in the dirt." She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. 7 months now. It's a girl. Elena's smile was warm as summer. "A daughter. Oh, that's perfect. This place needs a daughter's touch." She pulled the pie from the oven, its savory scent filling the cottage. "Come on, let's get some food in you both. Then maybe we can talk about reviving that garden come spring." They were halfway through dinner when another knock came. Calder stood in the doorway, looking almost shy, holding a worn leather box. "Sorry to interrupt, I just thought, well, these might be useful." He set the box on a side table. "Medical records, vitamins, things Sarah had gathered. They're still good, according to the dates. Elena can help you sort through them." Before he could retreat, Elena called out, "Join us, boss. Plenty of pie to go around." Something flickered in his eyes. Hesitation, maybe fear. But he stepped inside, removing his snow-dusted boots. They ate together in surprisingly comfortable silence, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace and the occasional satisfied sigh. "The springs helped today," Maris offered quietly. "You were right about their healing properties." Calder looked up, really looking at her for the first time since the auction. "Sarah used to say they were magic, not the fairy tale kind, but the older sort, earth magic." He smiled slightly. "I always told her she'd been reading too many legends, but sitting out there alone all these years, sometimes I'd swear she was right." "Not alone anymore," Elena said firmly, gathering their plates. "Now, Maris, honey, let's look through that box. Calder, Pete could use a hand with the north fence tomorrow if you're free. Something about tracks he wants you to see." It was a dismissal wrapped in kindness, and Calder accepted it with grace. At the door he paused. "If you need anything, I know where to find you," Maris finished, and the look that passed between them held understanding deeper than words. Later, after Eleanor had gone and the box's contents were neatly arranged on her bedside table, Maris stood at her window. The snow had stopped, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white. In the main house, a single light burned. Calder's study, she guessed. Out here, surrounded by mountains and silence, the suffocating weight of the Bailey family felt distant, like a half-remembered nightmare. She touched her daughter's latest kick, smiling at its strength. "We're safe here, little one," she whispered. "Safe and maybe even home." The word echoed in the quiet room. Not a promise yet, but a possibility. Outside, the hot springs sent steam into the freezing air, creating ghostly dances in the moonlight, and in that moment, Maris could believe in magic too. Not the kind found in fairy tales, but the deeper magic of second chances and healing hearts. A week of snow had left the ranch in pristine isolation. Maris found herself drawn to the main house's library, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the valley, while she sorted through ranch receipts. Her way of earning her keep, she'd insisted, despite Calder's protests. That's where. She found the photo album, tucked between leather-bound volumes of Thoreau and Muir. Its spine was well-worn, speaking of frequent handling. She shouldn't look, she knew, but after 7 days of careful distance, her curiosity about her enigmatic benefactor won out. The first photo stopped her breath. Calder and Sarah on their wedding day, but not a formal portrait. They were caught. Mid-laugh, Sarah's dark curls wild in the mountain wind, Calder looking at her like she'd hung the stars. They stood before the same iron gates she'd passed through a week ago, but the roses weren't weathered then. They bloomed in metal magnificence like something from a dream. That was a good day. She startled at Calder's voice, nearly dropping the album. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No, it's okay." He moved into the room, snow melting from his boots. "Been meaning to dig those out anyway. Some memories deserve to breathe." He settled into the chair opposite her, close enough to see the photos, but far enough to maintain their careful bubble of space. "Sarah would have liked you, I think. She had that same spark in her eyes, the one that says you've got depths the world doesn't see." Maris traced the photo's edge gently. "Tell me about her. If you want to, I mean." Something in Calder's face softened, like ice giving way to spring. She was a force of nature, taught history at the high school, but really she taught life. Kids who'd never cared about the past suddenly couldn't get enough, because she made them see how it connected to everything. He reached for the album, turning pages with familiar reverence. Here, her famous Thanksgiving pageant. She had the football team dressed as pilgrims, dancing. Actually dancing. The photo showed teenage boys in buckled shoes, grinning despite themselves, while a woman with Sarah's wild curls directed from the side, her enthusiasm practically radiating from the faded image. "She sounds wonderful," Maris said softly. She was. Calder's voice held more warmth than pain now. "When we found out about the baby, she started planning this elaborate nursery theme, American frontier meets fairy tale. Said our son would grow up knowing both magic and history." Maris felt her own child shift, as if responding to the story. "What happened? If you don't mind telling me." Black ice. A truck driver who'd been on the road too long. Sarah was coming home from a late parent-teacher conference. He closed his eyes briefly. "The sheriff said it was instant, no pain. I held on to that in the dark days after." Without thinking, Maris reached across the space between them, touching his hand. "Thank you for sharing her with me." His fingers tightened briefly around hers before letting go. "What about you? Your story with Thomas, only if you want to tell it." Maris looked out at the snow-covered valley, gathering her thoughts. "We met at an art gallery in Seattle. I was working as a curator's assistant, living on dreams and ramen. Thomas was different from his family. Gentle. He loved poetry and painting, things his father called wasteful distractions." She smoothed her sweater over her growing belly. "When we married, his family insisted on the guardianship agreement, called it a precaution, given my unstable artistic temperament. Thomas promised he'd never enforce it, that it was just to keep the peace. Then his heart gave out 6 months ago, and suddenly I was property, not a widow. And the baby? The last piece of Thomas's gentle heart, and the Bailey family's chance to raise a proper heir without my influence." Her laugh held no humor. "They didn't count on you." "They didn't count on your strength," Calder corrected quietly. "I just provided an escape route." Pete's boots in the hallway broke the moment. "Boss, those tracks we saw, they're back. Looking like we might have a wolf den up by the North Creek." Calder stood, reluctance and duty warring in his expression. "I should check on that. Will you be here for dinner? Elena's making her green chili stew." "I'd like that," Maris said, and was surprised to realize how much she meant it. After he left, she stayed with the photo album, learning Sarah's smile, the way she and Calder fit together in image after image. But it wasn't sadness she felt, it was gratitude for this woman who had loved so fully that she'd left behind a man capable of such kindness. Outside, the snow began again, soft and steady, while inside, the walls of grief and guardedness began to thaw, drip by precious drip. The February thaw came early, bringing with it the first whispers of spring. Maris stood at the edge of Sarah's abandoned garden, Elena beside her, both women studying the snow-patched ground, where the greenhouse's shadow made patterns like church windows. "Found these in the root cellar," Elena said, holding out a wooden box with brass hinges. Inside, dozens of seed packets nestled in neat rows, their vintage labels faded but legible. Sarah was particular about saving heirloom varieties, said every seed had a story worth keeping. Maris lifted one packet reverently. "Black Krim tomatoes." The paper crinkled softly under her fingers. "My grandmother grew these in her Victory garden during the war. Said they tasted like summer itself." "Then they belong with you." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "Pete and I have cleared most of the overgrowth. The bones of Sarah's design are still there, under all that wild. Just needs someone to wake it up." The garden had been haunting Maris's dreams lately, not as it was now, half buried in winter, but as it could be. In her dreams, she saw raised beds bursting with life, trellises heavy with climbing roses, herbs releasing their secrets to the mountain air. A place where her daughter could learn that beautiful things come from getting your hands dirty. She was on her knees in the cold earth, testing the soil with careful fingers, when Calder found her. He stood at the garden's edge, his shadow falling. Across newly cleared ground. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. Maris sat back on her heels, one hand absently cradling her 8-month belly. "I know, but I think she'd want someone to love it again." Something shifted in Calder's stance. He moved forward slowly, as if approaching a wild thing that might startle. Kneeling beside her, he touched the earth himself. Sarah used to say a garden is hope made visible, that everything beautiful starts with getting your hands dirty. He looked up, meeting Maris's eyes. "Elena told you about the seeds. They're amazing. All these varieties, all these stories." She opened the box again, showing him. "These sunset runner beans. They're from a family in Idaho that's been growing them since 1902. And these moon and stars watermelons, they're—" She trailed off, realizing she'd been rambling. But Calder was smiling, really smiling for the first time since she'd known him. "You sound just like her. Sarah could talk about seeds for hours. Used to drive me crazy, until I realized it wasn't just about the plants. It was about continuity, about keeping stories alive." "The Baileys," Maris said softly. "They thought gardening was beneath their family's dignity, called it servant's work." She straightened her spine, feeling the old anger rise and fall. "But I've never felt more dignified than when I'm helping something grow." Calder stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. "The greenhouse needs some repair before spring really hits. I'll have Pete look at the irrigation system." He paused, then added, "Sarah's tools are still in the potting shed. They should be used by someone who understands what they're for." After he left, Maris opened the remaining seed packets one by one. Each held a piece of history, a story waiting to be continued. Hungarian blue-bread poppy, passed down through generations of immigrant. Bakers, glass gemcorn, saved by a Cherokee grandfather who believed in preserving beauty. Dragon tongue beans, smuggled out of Poland before the war. She was so absorbed in the seed stories that she didn't hear Eleanor return until the older woman spoke. "First time I've seen him smile like that since Sarah died." Maris looked up, squinting. "In the afternoon light." "Like what?" "Like maybe the world isn't finished with possibilities, after all." Eleanor sat on a cleared bench, her gardening wisdom wrapped in careful words. "You know, when Sarah died, he didn't just lose his wife and child. He lost his future, all the stories they were going to write together." "I'm not trying to replace those stories," Maris said quietly. "No, honey, you're writing your own." "But maybe that's what this place has been waiting for." Eleanor gestured to the wakening garden. "New stories, growing right alongside the old ones." That evening, as sunset painted the mountains gold, Maris planted the first seeds in small pots by her window. Black crim tomatoes, dragon tongue beans, moon and stars watermelon, each one a promise, a continuation, a quiet rebellion against those who would keep her from growing wild and free. In the soft dirt, she buried her fears about the future, her anger at the Baileys, her grief for Thomas. And in their place, she planted hope, not just for herself and her daughter, but for the quiet man up at the main house who was finally learning to smile again. The old weather radio crackled to life at dawn, its static-filled warning pulling Calder from sleep. He'd learned long ago to keep it by his bed during Montana winters, when storms could turn from threatening to deadly in the space of a heartbeat. Severe winter storm warning for Silver Creek County. Expect up to 30 inches of snow, winds gusting to 60 miles per hour. Travel not advised, potential power outages. He was already pulling on his boots when Pete's truck ground up the drive. Through the window, he watched his ranch manager check the generator, then head toward the barn to secure the livestock. The sky hung low and heavy, the color of a bruise. The knock on his door was unexpected. Maris stood there, wrapped in one of Elena's old parkas, her breath visible in the pre-storm air. "Elena said I should come up to the main house. The guest house generator isn't as reliable, and with the baby—" She trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Elena's right," Calder said, stepping back to let her in. "We've got the industrial generator. Up here, and the kitchen's better stocked. Pete's bringing Elena up too, once the animals are settled. Inside, the house was warm and smelled of coffee. Maris shed the parka, revealing her now prominent belly beneath a soft sweater. 8.5 months, Calder calculated, feeling the familiar mix of joy and anxiety that came with each sign of her approaching due date. "The garden," she started. "The greenhouse is secure," he assured her. "Pete reinforced it last week. Your seedlings will be fine." She nodded, relief evident in the softening of her shoulders. They stood in awkward silence until the coffee maker's timer clicked, giving them both something to do. Calder poured 2 mugs, remembering how Sarah had taken hers. "Do you—" "Black is fine," Maris said. "The Baileys had very specific ideas about pregnant women and caffeine, but my doctor says 1 cup a day is perfectly safe." The bitterness in her voice when she mentioned her former in-laws made something in Calder's chest tighten. Before he could respond, the first blast of wind hit the house, rattling the windows in their frames. "That's our cue," Pete called from the doorway, stamping snow from his boots. Elena followed, carrying a basket of supplies. "Storm's moving in faster than predicted. Might be stuck here a while." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Elena took over the kitchen, setting up what she called her storm station. Coffee, soup makings, boards games, and battery-powered lanterns all within easy reach. Pete monitored the weather radio and checked the generator's fuel levels, and Calder found himself hyper-aware of Maris's presence as she moved through his home, her quiet grace making the space feel lived in for the first time in years. When the power finally went out mid-afternoon, the generator kicked in seamlessly. Outside, the storm raged in earnest, snow falling so thick it erased the world beyond the windows. Pete and Elena retreated to the guest room they used during emergencies, leaving Calder and Maris alone in the living room. The fire he'd built cast dancing shadows on the walls. Maris sat in Sarah's old reading chair, the one Calder hadn't been able to give away, her feet tucked under her, hands resting on her belly. "She's restless today," she said softly. "All this changing pressure, maybe." Calder looked up from adding another log to the fire. "She? Found out last checkup. The Baileys." She hesitated, then continued stronger. "The Baileys didn't want to know, said gender reveals were tacky. But I wanted to know her as much as I could before she arrives. A daughter." The word held weight, possibility. That's wonderful. Maris." Their eyes met across the firelit room, and something shifted in the air between them. Maris's hand went to her belly again, but this time her expression was different, surprised, then wondering. Would you like to feel her kick? She's quite active right now." The question hung in the air like snowflakes, delicate and transformative. Calder moved slowly, giving her time to change her mind. Kneeling beside the chair, he held his hand out, letting her guide it to the spot where her daughter danced beneath her heart. The kick was strong, decisive. Calder's breath caught, remembering the only time he'd felt his son move, the night before the accident. But this time the memory brought something besides pain. A sense of continuity, of life's persistence in the face of loss. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to Maris, to her unborn daughter, or to whatever twist of fate had brought them to his door. The storm howled outside, but in here, in this moment, something quiet and profound was taking root, as unstoppable as seedlings reaching for the sun. The letter arrived on a Thursday, tucked between seed catalogs and ranch supply invoices. Maris recognized the Bailey family's legal letterhead instantly, cream-colored paper embossed with gold, heavy with threat. Her hands shook as she set aside the watering can she'd been using in the greenhouse. Pete, who'd brought the mail up from town, watched her face carefully. "Want me to get the boss?" She shook her head, squaring her shoulders. "No, I need to face this myself." But she was grateful when Pete stayed nearby, pretending to check the greenhouse temperature controls while she broke the seal. "Deter, Words were precise, measured deadly in their implications. "Dear Mrs. Bailey, our investigators have uncovered concerning information regarding your fitness as a mother. Your employment history at the Seattle Art Museum's Restoration Department raises questions about exposure to harmful chemicals during early pregnancy. Additionally, your family's history of mental health challenges, which you failed to disclose prior to marriage, suggests a pattern of instability. We are prepared to present this evidence at a formal custody hearing immediately following the birth of the child. Mr. Royce's interference, while well-intentioned, does not negate our legal and moral obligation to ensure the Bailey heir is raised appropriately. Consider carefully whether you wish to pursue this course of action. A reasonable settlement, including supervised visitation, and appropriate compensation remains on the table. Regards, Harrison Bailey III." The paper crumpled in Maris's grip. "They've been investigating me. All this time they've been—" Her breath came short and sharp. "Easy now." Pete's voice was gentle but firm. "Let's get you sitting down. Boss needs to see this." "See what?" Calder stood in the greenhouse doorway, morning light catching the silver in his hair. One look at Maris's face had him crossing the space between them in long strides. She handed him the letter wordlessly, watching his expression darken as he read. When he finished, he folded the paper with deliberate care, but she saw the tremor in his hands. "They can't," he said quietly. "They can't take your child, can't they?" Maris pressed her hands to her belly, feeling her daughter's responsive kick. "They have money, influence, a team of lawyers, and I'm just an art restorer who married above her station. That's what they always said. You're not just anything." Calder's voice held the same steel she'd heard at the auction. "And they're not the only ones with resources." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "I know someone. Retired judge turned family law specialist. Handled my estate planning after Sarah. She'll know how to fight this." "Fight it how?" Maris stood, swaying slightly as her center of gravity shifted. "They're right about the restoration work. I didn't know I was pregnant then. Thomas and I weren't trying. And my mother, she did have depression. They'll twist everything, make me look unfit. Your mother's illness doesn't define you." Elena's voice came from the doorway. She must have seen Pete's urgent gestures from outside. "And working an honest job doesn't make you unfit. It makes you strong." Calder was already dialing. "Judge Martinez, it's Calder Royce. Remember that favor you said you owed me? I'm calling it in." He stepped outside to take the call, but his hand brushed Maris's shoulder as he passed, a touch so light she might have imagined it, yet somehow anchoring. Elena moved closer, her practical love filling the greenhouse with strength. "Those chemicals you worked with, did your doctor say there was any risk?" "No." Maris wiped angry tears. "I had tests, ultrasounds. She's perfect. Growing exactly as she should. Then we document that. Get statements from your doctors, your supervisors at the museum. Show that you were a professional following proper safety protocols." Elena's mind worked like a general planning battle. Strategy. "And your mother, was she a good mom despite her struggles?" Maris thought of her childhood, of art museums and victory gardens, of bedtime stories and fierce, protective love. "The best. She taught me everything I know about beauty and strength." "Then that's your heritage, honey, not whatever poisoned legacy the Baileys are selling," Calder returned, his face set with purpose. "Judge Martinez can see us tomorrow in Helena. She says to bring everything, medical records, employment history, whatever you have. Pete, can you and Elena handle things here?" "Already on it, boss. I'll check those wolf tracks up north while you're gone." Elena's got the greenhouse covered. The letter sat on the potting bench, its gold embossing catching light like a snake's warning scales. But Maris felt stronger now, surrounded by these. "People who saw her worth beyond the Bailey's narrow measure. I won't let them take her," she said, and her voice held the same quiet power that had caught Calder's attention that first day at the auction. "I won't let them make her ashamed of who she is, like they did to Thomas." Calder's eyes met hers, and in them she saw not just support, but understanding. He too knew what it meant to fight for the future of a child. "We won't let them," he corrected gently. "You're not alone in this anymore." Outside, spring sun warmed the greenhouse glass, while inside, her daughter kicked against her ribs, both of them signals of life persisting, growing stronger, refusing to be contained by others' limitations. The church bulletin board in Silver Creek's town square had always been more than just a place for announcements. It was the heart of community news, the pulse of local life. And today, tucked between potluck dinners and lost cat notices, a simple message sparked fierce protective instincts in the small town. Prayer circle for Maris and baby, Sunday after service, standing against injustice. All welcome, Reverend Grace hadn't asked permission to post it. She'd simply hugged Maris after their meeting, her eyes bright with righteous fire, and said, "This community protects its own." Calder found Maris staring at the bulletin board, one hand pressed to her lower back as she read the growing list of signatures below the notice, names of people who'd never met her, yet stood ready to defend her right to motherhood. "I didn't expect this," she whispered as he joined her. "The Baileys always said small towns would look down on someone like me. No proper background, no family connections." "The Baileys," Calder said carefully, "never understood that real connections aren't bought with money or status." He gestured to where Mrs. Chen from the pharmacy was adding her name to the list. "They're built one kindness at a time." The door of Maggie's diner chimed, and Maggie herself emerged carrying 2 steaming cups. "Peppermint tea for Mama," she announced, pressing 1 cup into Maris's hands, "and coffee for the protector. Now come in before you catch cold. I've got a fresh batch of those biscuits your little one seems to crave." Inside, the diner was warm with more than just cooking heat. Regular customers nodded and smiled, their acceptance wrapping around Maris like a handmade quilt. Sheriff Matthews sat at the counter, his presence a quiet reminder that law enforcement stood on the side of justice, not money. "Judge Martinez called," he said as they settled into a booth. "Wanted my impression of the situation, told her about that auction day, how they tried to sell a human being like cattle. She was not pleased. The Baileys have friends in high and places," Maris reminded them, but her voice held less fear than before. "Maybe so." Maggie set down a plate of biscuits, her face fierce with maternal protection. "But they don't have friends here, and here is where you are." As if to prove her point, the diner's door opened again. Sarah's former teaching colleague, Marion Hayes, entered with an armful of papers. "Found them," she announced triumphantly. "Every letter Sarah wrote to me about starting a family-centered reading program at the library. She believed so strongly in nurturing children through literature and art." She met Calder's eyes. "She'd be standing right here with us, you know." Calder's throat tightened. "I know." The afternoon unfolded like a flower, each hour bringing new allies. The museum curator from Helena arrived with documentation of Maris's exemplary work record and safety protocols. Dr. Wilson, who'd been Sarah's doctor and now attended Maris, brought detailed records showing the baby's perfect development. Even Pete and Elena drove into town, carrying letters from neighboring ranchers who'd witnessed Maris's dedication to bringing the garden back to life. "You've created quite a stir," Calder observed as they finally headed home, the truck's heater, fighting off the early spring chill. "Half the town's ready to testify about your character." "It's not just about me anymore," Maris said softly. "Every signature on that bulletin board, every letter of support, they're all saying something bigger. That worth isn't measured by bank accounts or family names. That community means standing together against bullies, no matter how powerful they seem." Calder glanced at her profile in the fading light. The scared woman from the auction seemed lifetimes ago, replaced by someone who glowed with quiet strength and growing confidence. "The Baileys tried to isolate Thomas too," she continued. "Said artists and dreamers weren't worthy of their name. He believed them in the end. Gave up painting, gave up everything that made him himself." Her hand curved protectively over her belly. "I won't let them do that to our daughter." The hour slipped out naturally, and neither of them commented on it, but something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of how their separate causes had become entwined. As they turned onto the ranch road, the setting sun painted the mountains in shades of hope. In the distance, wolves called to each other, not lonely sounds now, but signals of family, of belonging. Sarah used to say, Calder spoke slowly, choosing his words with care, that love isn't just about fighting for someone. It's about building something worth fighting for. Maris reached across the seat, taking his hand. This time, neither of I in them let go. The hospital bracelet was stark white against Maris's skin, its printed information reducing her to basic data. Bailey, Maris, Preg 35 WKS, preeclampsia, watch. But it was the second bracelet that made Calder's heart stop. Fall. Risk, high alert. He'd been checking the wolf tracks with Pete when Elena's call came. Just 2 words. It's Maris. And he was running for the truck. The memory of another urgent call 15 years ago, thundering in his ears. Now he sat beside her hospital bed, watching monitors track 2 heartbeats, while Dr. Wilson studied printouts with practiced calm. The story emerged in pieces. Maris in the greenhouse, a sudden spike in blood pressure, the world tilting sideways. Elena finding her in time, catching her before she hit the ground. The good news, Dr. Wilson said, her voice steady, is we caught it early. Your blood pressure's responding to medication, and the baby's showing no signs of distress, but... She paused, meeting Maris's eyes directly. You need complete bed rest until delivery. No exceptions. But the garden, Maris protested weakly. The court date. We'll still be there after your daughter arrives safely. The doctor's tone softened. Maris, preeclampsia is serious. You're both at risk if we don't manage this carefully. Calder watched the fear flutter across Maris's face, saw her hands press against her belly as if she could protect her daughter through will alone. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, and the way her fingers gripped his told him everything about her terror. I'll have Elena set up a bed in the main house, he said quietly. Better monitoring, closer to the phone. Pete can drive you to appointments. I couldn't impose. You're not imposing. His voice was rough with emotions he couldn't name. You're letting us help. There's a difference. Dr. Wilson nodded approvingly. The next few weeks are critical. Complete rest, regular monitoring, and she fixed Maris with a stern look. Absolutely no stress about legal battles or garden beds. Your only job is growing this baby. After the doctor left, silence filled the room like rising water. The monitors beeped steadily, each sound a reminder of 2 lives hanging in precarious balance. Through the window, snow began to fall, a late spring storm that would dust the garden's new growth with white. I'm sorry, Maris whispered finally. I should have been more careful, should have noticed the symptoms. Don't. Calder's grip on her hand tightened. When Sarah, he swallowed hard. After the accident, I spent years thinking of all the should-haves. It doesn't help. What matters is now. You're here, you're both safe, and you're not alone. She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I keep thinking about Thomas, how he died alone in a hospital room because his family thought calling me would be inappropriate while they were at a charity gala. They didn't even tell me until the next morning. That's not happening here. Calder's voice held the same quiet authority he used with spooked horses. Elena's already setting up a rotation schedule with half the town. You'll probably have to beat visitors away with a stick. As if on cue, a soft knock announced Reverend Grace, carrying a handmade quilt in sunset colors. From the church ladies, she said, draping it over Maris's legs. Each square sewn with prayers for you and your little one. More visitors followed, Maggie with containers of nourishing soup, Marion Hayes with books to pass the time, even Sheriff Matthews stopping by to report that Judge Martinez had agreed to delay the hearing until after the baby's safe arrival. Through it all, Calder didn't leave her side. He watched her doze between visits, saw the way she instinctively curved toward him in sleep. When night fell and the visitors went home, he stayed, remembering another vigil in another hospital. But this time with hope instead of grief for company. "You don't have to stay," Maris murmured, half asleep under the community's quilt of love. "I know." He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, letting his hand linger. "But I want to." She smiled faintly, her eyes still closed. "Tell me a story, about Sarah, about the ranch, about anything." So he told her about Sarah's first winter on the ranch, about the blizzard that trapped them for 3 days, about how they'd made up ridiculous songs and built blanket forts like children. As he spoke, he felt Maris relax, her breathing deepening, while the monitors kept their steady vigil. Outside, the spring snow continued to fall, covering the world in clean white possibility. And in the quiet hospital room, 2 hearts learned to beat in time with 2 others, creating a rhythm like hope, like healing, like love being born again. The court summons arrived like a declaration of war, hand-delivered by a courier who looked uncomfortable under Elena's fierce glare. Though Maris was confined to bed rest in the main house, the document's presence seemed to fill every room with its threatening weight. "Motion for emergency temporary guardianship," Judge Martinez read over video call, her expression grave. "They're not waiting for the birth. They're claiming your current medical condition proves their point about instability." She looked up, steel in her eyes. "But they've overplayed their hand. Medical crisis during pregnancy isn't grounds for removing parental rights. If it were, half the mothers in Montana would lose their children." Maris sat propped against pillows in Calder's study, her laptop balanced on a tray Elena had decorated with fresh wildflowers. Through the window, she could see her greenhouse gleaming in the May sunshine, Eleanor tending the seedlings with devoted care. "They'll bring up my mother again," Maris said quietly. "Say that complications like this run in families. Let them." Judge Martinez's voice held controlled fury. "Because I have something they don't expect." She held up a file. "Your mother's complete medical records, which you authorized us to obtain. 25 years of successful treatment for postpartum depression, while raising a daughter who earned scholarships, graduated with honors, and became a respected art conservator. That's not a history of instability. It's a testament to strength and responsible medical care." Calder, who'd been standing silent sentinel by the fireplace, moved closer to Maris's chair. "What do they want, really? Beyond custody? Control." Maris's hand rested on her belly, feeling her daughter's reassuring movements. "The Baileys built their fortune controlling things, land, resources, people. Thomas was their first failure, choosing art and love over banking and status. They won't risk their grandchild following his path." "Then that's what we show the court," Judge Martinez said. "Not just your fitness as a mother, but their unfitness as guardians, their pattern of emotional manipulation, their treatment of Thomas, their attempt to literally sell you at auction." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "And we show them what real protection looks like." The day of the hearing dawned clear and cold. Though Maris couldn't attend in person, technology made her presence in the Helena courthouse unmistakable. On the large screen, she sat in Sarah's old reading chair, surrounded by evidence of care, medical monitors, fresh flowers, Elena's quilts, and Calder's solid presence beside her. Harrison Bailey III cut an imposing figure in his tailored suit, but his confidence wavered when the gallery filled with familiar faces. Sheriff Matthews, Reverend Grace, Dr. Wilson, Marion Hayes, the entire Silver Creek community had come to stand witness. "Your Honor," the Bailey's lawyer began smoothly, "we have serious concerns about Mrs. Bailey's capacity to provide a stable environment for the heir to a significant family legacy." "Heir?" Judge Martinez's voice could have frozen hell. "You mean the unborn child your clients attempted to acquire through a public auction? The same child whose mother you're now trying to strip of her rights because she's following medical advice during a high-risk pregnancy." The testimony unfolded like a tapestry woven of contrasting threads. The Baileys presented their carefully curated image of wealth and propriety, speaking of family traditions and social obligations. But each polished statement was met with raw truth. Dr. Wilson, Mrs. Bailey has shown exemplary attention to her health and her child's well-being, seeking care promptly and following all medical guidance. Reverend Grace, I've watched her build more genuine community connections in months than the Baileys managed in generations of writing charity checks. Marion Hayes, she's already created a children's reading nook in her greenhouse, planning educational activities that combine nature and literature. As an educator, I can't think of a more nurturing environment. But it was Elena's testimony that struck the deepest chord. I've worked at Royce Ranch for 20 years, watched it survive loss and grief. Now, watching Maris bring life back to that garden, seeing how she and Calder heal each other without even realizing it, that's the kind of home any child would be blessed to have. The Baileys' lawyer pounced. So you admit Mrs. Bailey has formed an attachment to her employer while living on his property, dependent on his charity? Objection. Judge Martinez's voice cracked like lightning. Counsel's implications are both irrelevant and offensive. Mrs. Bailey's personal relationships are not on trial here. The only question before us is whether there's any legitimate basis for emergency guardianship. She looked directly into the camera, addressing Maris. Having reviewed all evidence, including the original guardianship agreement's questionable circumstances, I'm not only denying the emergency motion, but scheduling a hearing to terminate the agreement entirely. Mrs. Bailey, your medical condition demonstrates responsible maternal care, not instability. This court sees you and stands with you. The Bailey family's expressions could have curdled milk, but Maris barely noticed. She was looking at Calder, seeing in his eyes the same fierce joy that burned in her heart. Not just victory, but vindication. Not just protection, but partnership. Later, when the lawyers had gone and the celebrations had quieted, she found the court summons again. Its formal language no longer held any power to frighten. Like the seeds in her greenhouse, she had put down roots too deep to be easily uprooted, grown too strong to be shaped by others' demands. The birth certificate was yellowed with age, its official seal faded, but still visible. Elena found it while sorting through Sarah's old files, looking for garden plans to help with the greenhouse expansion. At first, she almost set it aside, just another document from the past, until a name caught her eye and the world shifted on its axis. Calder, she called, her voice uncertain. You need to see this. He was at Maris's bedside, reading aloud from one of Sarah's favorite books, while monitoring her afternoon blood pressure check. The past weeks of bed rest had created a comfortable intimacy between them, filled with shared stories and comfortable silences. Can it wait? He asked, marking their place in the book. No, Elena said quietly. It really can't. The certificate trembled slightly in her hands as she passed it to him. Maris, watching from her nest of pillows, saw the moment everything changed. Saw Calder's face drain of color as he read, saw him sink slowly into his chair. What is it? She asked, worry threading through her voice. What's wrong? Not wrong, Elena said softly. Just unexpected. She took Maris's hand. Honey, this is Sarah's birth certificate. Her mother's name was Margaret Chen. Chen? Maris's voice caught. But that's your mother's maiden name, Calder finished, looking up from the document with wonder in his eyes. Sarah was your mother's niece, your cousin. The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, a meadowlark called, its song carrying through the open window, along with the scent of blooming lilacs that Sarah had planted years ago. That's not possible, Maris whispered. Mom never mentioned. Did she talk much about her family? Eleanor prompted gently. No, she said they'd disowned her for marrying my father, for choosing art over their plans for her. Maris's hand went to her belly, a habitual gesture of self-comfort. I never even saw pictures. Sarah didn't know them either, Calder said, his voice rough with memory. Her mother died when she was young. Her father, he never spoke of his. Wife's family, said the past was past. He looked at Maris with new eyes, seeing now what he should have recognized before. The same graceful hands as Sarah's, the same quiet strength. The garden, Maris breathed, the way it called to me. From the first moment, the heirloom seeds carried through generations, Elena nodded. Sarah's mother smuggled them out of China during the revolution, just like your grandmother did. Different branches of the same family tree, carrying the same precious heritage. Calder moved, to sit on the edge of Maris's bed, the birth certificate still in his hands. All this time, he said softly, you were drawn here to this land, to Sarah's garden. To you, Maris completed, reaching for his hand. Maybe some part of her knew, wanted to heal both our broken pieces. She would have loved you, Calder said, his voice thick with emotion. Would have loved seeing her garden bloom again, seeing new life take root. Eleanor slipped quietly from the room, leaving them to absorb the magnitude of this revelation. Through the window, they could see the greenhouse where Maris's seedlings reached for the sun, carrying forward Sarah's legacy in more ways than they'd known. I've been so afraid, Maris admitted, tears sliding down her cheeks. Afraid I was. Dishonoring Thomas's memory by feeling what I feel for you. Afraid I was trying to replace Sarah somehow. Never that. Calder's thumb brushed away her tears. Sarah taught me that love isn't a finite resource. It grows, like your garden, finding new spaces to bloom. The Baileys were wrong about so much, Maris said wonderingly. They thought bloodlines were about control and obligation. But look at this. Look at how blood really calls to blood. Through gardens and seeds, through healing and hope. Their daughter chose that moment to kick vigorously, making them both laugh. Calder's hand joined Maris's over the spot. She's going to have quite a story, he said softly, about how her mother found her way home without even knowing she was lost, about how sometimes the greatest loves grow from the deepest roots, about how family is more than names in ledgers or legal documents. Maris added, it's the stories we choose to continue, the love we choose to nurture. The birth certificate lay between them, its revelation transforming from shock to blessing. Outside, the lilacs Sarah had planted waved in the spring breeze, their sweet scent carrying promises of renewal, of connections that ran deeper than loss, of love that found its way home through generations of waiting. The 2 plane tickets lay on Maris's bedside table, their crisp white edges catching morning light. One way to Seattle, first class, dated 2 weeks after her due date. Dr. Wilson had finally cleared her for travel, and her old museum colleagues had offered her position back, along with an apartment in a secure building where the Baileys couldn't reach her. A clean escape, a fresh start. Everything she'd dreamed of during those dark days under the Baileys' control. So why did the tickets feel like lead in her hands? You don't have to decide right away, Calder said from the doorway. He'd brought her morning tea, but hadn't crossed the threshold, as if sensing her need for space with this decision. The tickets won't expire. She looked up at him, this man who'd become so much more than her rescuer. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, reminding her of the greenhouse's metal frame, strong, supportive, creating space for things to grow. The museum's installing a new children's wing, she said softly. Interactive exhibits about art conservation, science meeting creativity, everything I used to dream of doing. Sounds perfect. His voice was carefully neutral, but she saw the cost of that control in his knuckles white around the teacup. It does, doesn't it? She traced the ticket's edges. The perfect escape. The perfect fresh start. She met his eyes. The perfect way to run away. He crossed the room then, setting the tea beside her before taking his usual chair, the one that had gradually moved closer to her bed over these weeks of shared stories and quiet revelations. You're not running, he said firmly. You're choosing. There's a difference. Is there? She shifted, making room for him to sit on the bed's edge, an invitation he accepted with careful grace. The Baileys would say, I'm abandoning my responsibilities, running from my duty to their family name. The Baileys, Calder's voice held, controlled anger, lost any right to an opinion when they tried to sell you like property. But that's just it. She reached for his hand, needing the anchor of his calloused palm against hers. I'm not property, not theirs, not Thomas's, not even yours. For the first time in so long I get to choose, really choose. Understanding dawned in his eyes. And if you stay because of me, because of what's growing between us, then I'm letting someone else define my path again. She squeezed his hand, even if that someone has the kindest heart I've ever known. Outside, the garden called to her with afternoon shadows. Sarah's garden, her garden now, where heirloom seeds carried stories of women choosing their own ways, finding strength in roots they planted themselves. When Sarah died, Calder said slowly, I thought I was choosing to honor her memory by closing myself off, keeping her spaces untouched, like some kind of shrine. He looked around the room that had become Maris's during her bed rest, at the art books scattered across the blankets, the sketches of garden plans pinned to walls, the ultrasound photos proudly displayed. But she would have hated that. She believed in living spaces, in growth and change. She would have loved the children's wing at the museum, Maris said softly, teaching kids about art and science, about preserving beautiful things. She would have loved it, Calder agreed. Then, with visible effort, Seattle's not so far. Pete's got the plane we could visit. Watch our niece grow up. The word our hung between them, heavy with meaning. Maris felt her daughter kick strong and sure. I need to choose for myself, she whispered. For us. Her free hand cradled her belly. Need to know I'm strong enough to stand alone. You've always been strong enough. Calder's voice was rough, with emotion. I just gave you a safe place to remember that. She looked at him then, really looked, seeing the man who'd risked everything to save a stranger, who'd opened his home and his heart, who was now offering to let her go so she could truly choose to stay. The museum job, she said carefully. They mentioned wanting satellite programs, outreach to rural communities, teaching art conservation in places that can't reach the city. Hope flickered in Calder's eyes, but he held it in check. Sounds ambitious. It would need a home base, somewhere central to the region with space for workshops. She smiled, feeling the rightness settle in her bones. Maybe somewhere with a greenhouse already set up for teaching, and a garden full of history and healing. Maris. Her name was a prayer on his lips. I choose myself, she said firmly. My strength, my dreams, my path. But Calder? She brought their joined hands to rest over her heart. My path keeps leading back here, to this land, to Sarah's legacy. She took a deep breath. To you. The tickets lay forgotten as he gathered her close, their embrace gentle with wonder and fierce with certainty. Outside, the garden bloomed in late spring glory, Sarah's lilacs mingling with Maris's new plantings, separate flowers creating a single perfect fragrance. The baby blanket took shape under Elena's skilled hands as they waited, its pattern telling stories in silk and wool. Chinese lotus flowers bloomed alongside Montana wildflowers, while delicate dragons danced through mountain peaks. In the corner, Elena had embroidered 3 names in silver thread, Sarah Chen, Thomas Bailey, and beneath them, a space waiting for the new life about to enter the world. The contractions are 5 minutes apart now, Dr. Wilson announced, checking the monitors. That had become so familiar during Maris's bed rest. Baby's handling everything beautifully. You're doing great, Maris. Maris gripped Calder's hand as another wave peaked, her breath coming in the measured rhythms Eleanor had taught her. The summer storm outside matched her labor's intensity. Thunder, rolling across the valley while lightning turned the midnight sky to brief day. Tell me again, she gasped between contractions. About the wolves, Calder smiled, continuing their earlier conversation as if pain hadn't interrupted it. Pete found the den this morning, 3 pups, healthy and strong. The mother must have known this was a safe place to bring new life into the world. He brushed sweat-dampened hair from her forehead. "Just like you did." "The garden," she started. But another contraction took her words. "Is fine," Elena assured her, setting aside her needlework to offer ice chips. "Those seedlings are as stubborn as their gardener. A little storm won't hurt them." Thunder crashed closer, and the monitors briefly switched to backup power before the generator kicked in. Dr. Wilson checked readings with practiced efficiency. 8 centimeters, she reported. "Your daughter's eager to meet her family." Family. The word echoed in Maris's heart as she looked at the faces surrounding her. Not the cold privilege of the Bailey mansion, but the warm reality of love freely given. Elena's fierce maternal pride, Pete's steady presence by the door, Calder's, hand anchoring her through each wave of pain. "Sarah went through this alone," she whispered during a brief respite. "While I was trapped in the Bailey's world of appearances, she was here, building something real. Not alone." Calder's voice was rough with memory. "Never alone. And neither are you." As if summoned by his words, the room filled with quiet strength. Elena humming an old lullaby her grandmother had sung. Pete reporting that the wolf mother had moved her pups to higher ground, away from the storm. Dr. Wilson's calm competence guiding them all toward the moment of meeting. 9 centimeters, the doctor announced. Almost time to push, Maris felt. Fear flutter beneath her determination. "I can't. What if I'm not?" "Look at me," Calder commanded gently. When she met his eyes, she saw not just the man who'd saved her, but the one who'd learned to let her save herself. "You grew a garden from abandoned earth. You stood against the Baileys with nothing but truth and courage. You found your way. Home to a family you didn't know you had." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You can do anything." The next contraction built like the storm outside, but this time Maris didn't fight it. She let it move through her like spring rain through fertile soil, like new life pushing toward the sun. "Now," Dr. Wilson called. "Push!" Time lost meaning, measured only in breath and effort and the ancient rhythm of birth. Thunder became a drumbeat, urging her on. Lightning painted the room in snapshots of determination. Elena's tears of joy, Pete's proud smile, Calder's face transformed by wonder. Then, cutting through storm and pain and fear, a new sound filled the room, high and strong, and perfectly angry at being thrust into the cold, bright world. "Hello, little one." Dr. Wilson's professional tone couldn't hide her emotion as she laid the squalling bundle on Maris's chest. "Welcome to your family." Maris looked down at her daughter's face, seeing echoes of Thomas's gentle spirit in the curve of her cheek, her own mother's strength in the tiny fists, and something uniquely new. The first page of a story waiting to be written. "Sarah," she whispered, then looked up at Calder. "Sarah Margaret, if that's okay." His kiss on her forehead was benediction and blessing. "It's perfect. She's perfect." Elena draped the finished blanket over them both, its embroidered stories, embracing mother and child. Outside, the storm began to ease, and through breaking clouds, the first light of dawn painted the mountains gold. "Look," Pete said softly from the window. "Rainbows coming up over the garden." Maris held her daughter close, surrounded by the family she'd chosen and the love that had chosen her. Sarah Margaret's cries softened to baby grumbles, then to sleep, while the room filled with morning light and the scent of rain-washed earth. "Welcome home, little one," Calder murmured, one hand spanning his niece's back while the other held Maris's fingers. "Welcome to a world of gardens and stories, of wild hearts and chosen families." Through happy tears, Maris watched the rainbow arc across the valley, its colors blessing the land where her daughter would grow strong and free, knowing only love's protection, never control's cage. The legal verdict arrived on cream-colored, and paper that matched the Bailey's threatening letters, but this time the words carried victory instead of menace. Judge Martinez's ruling was clear and absolute. The court hereby terminates all guardianship claims over Maris Chen Bailey and her minor child, Sarah Margaret Bailey. Furthermore, the attempted sale of human rights through public auction is referred to the State Attorney General for investigation of potential criminal charges. Maris read the words aloud from the porch rocker, her month-old daughter sleeping peacefully against her chest. The summer evening wrapped them in golden light, while the garden below released the day's heat in waves of herb-scented air. The sound of tires on gravel broke the peace. "They're here," Pete called from his watch. "Position at the gate." The Baileys had demanded one final meeting before accepting defeat, and Maris had agreed, on her terms, on her territory. Calder moved to stand beside the rocker, one hand resting protective on its back. Eleanor positioned herself near the porch steps, while Pete escorted the visitors up the drive. Harrison Bailey III had aged since the auction. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stoop in his shoulders, the tremor in his hands. James Jr. followed, trying to maintain his corporate polish despite the dust of the ranch road. "Well," Harrison said, looking up at the tableau on the porch, "I see you've made yourself quite at home. I am home. Maris's voice was quiet but carried the strength of mountains. "This is where we belong. That child," James stepped forward, "is a Bailey. Our blood, our legacy." "Blood?" Maris laughed softly, careful not to wake Sarah Margaret. "You want to talk about blood?" She nodded to Elena, who disappeared inside and returned with a familiar document, Sarah's birth certificate. "Let me tell you about blood." She watched comprehension dawn on their faces as she explained the connection to Sarah, to the Chen family legacy of art and gardens, to a heritage far richer than the Bailey banking fortune. "Impossible," Harrison breathed. "Thomas never would." Thomas knew. Maris's revelation landed like summer lightning. "He found out just before he died. Was going to tell me. That's why you rushed to enforce the guardianship, isn't it? Afraid I'd discover I had connections of my own." James's face went pale. "The agreement was meant to protect your control," Calder finished, "but you forgot something important. About blood." He gestured to the thriving garden. "It needs the right soil to grow strong, the right care to bloom." As if on cue, Sarah Margaret stirred, blinking up at the gathering with eyes that held Chen wisdom and Bailey gentleness, but belonged purely to herself. "You can fight the verdict," Maris said calmly. "Spend more money on lawyers, more time in courts, or—" She paused, letting summer wind carry the scent of lilacs, Sarah's lilacs, through the tension. "Or you can choose to be part of her life, not as owners or controllers, but as family. The kind of family Thomas wanted to be before you crushed his dreams." Harrison took a step toward the porch, then stopped as Pete shifted subtly to block his path. "And if we choose family, then you'll be welcome to visit, to know your granddaughter, to see her grow strong and free, surrounded by art and nature and love." Maris's voice hardened slightly. "But you'll never control her, never shape her into your idea of a proper heir. She'll choose her own path, just like her fathers did." "Fathers," James's voice cracked. "You and Royce are engaged," Calder said quietly. "Not that it's any of your business, but Sarah Margaret will have two legacies of love to draw from. Thomas's gentle heart and my promise to protect her freedom to use it." Harrison looked around slowly, taking in the flourishing ranch, the garden's wild beauty, the fierce family gathered on the porch. For the first time, his face showed something like understanding. "Thomas loved this kind of place," he said softly. Before I taught him, it wasn't acceptable, wasn't proper." He straightened his shoulders. Perhaps we could visit. When she's older, bring some of his paintings." He painted. Maris's heart caught. "I never knew." Hidden away in the attic, landscapes mostly, wild places. Harrison's voice faded as he looked at the mountain vista. "Places like this." "Next." "Your month," Maris offered. "Bring the paintings then. She should know all of her father's heart." The Baileys left as sunset painted the mountains rose gold. Their departure held none of their usual commanding presence. Instead, they walked like men beginning to see a different kind of wealth. After they'd gone, Maris stood at the garden's edge, holding her daughter up to see the first stars appearing. "Look, little one," she whispered. "Look at your kingdom. Not money or power or proper names. Just this, earth and art, love and freedom, and all the wild beauty your heart can hold." Calder's arms wrapped around them both, and together they watched night blanket their valley. Somewhere in the darkness, wolves called to their pups, while in the garden, Sarah's lilacs danced with Maris's new plantings in the evening breeze, separate blooms creating one perfect landscape of belonging. The marriage license lay nestled among Thomas's recently discovered paintings, its fresh ink a stark contrast to his watercolor landscapes. Maris touched both gently as she dressed for the ceremony, past and present, endings and beginnings, all flowing together like colors on canvas. "Ready?" Elena asked, entering with 3-month-old Sarah Margaret, who wore a dress sewn from pieces of both her grandmother's wedding gowns. The baby gurgled happily, reaching for the sunflowers in her mother's bouquet. Almost. Maris settled her daughter on her hip, studying their reflection. Her wedding dress was simple linen, perfect for a garden ceremony, with Sarah's restored, a veil adding vintage grace. "I want to show her something first." They walked together to the gallery wall Calder had created in the main house's living room. Thomas's paintings hung there now. Mountains and valleys captured in dreaming colors, scenes that could have been this very ranch. Beside them, photographs tracked Sarah Margaret's first months, sleeping in Elena's arms, Pete teaching her to feed the horses, Harrison Bailey reading her art books during his carefully orchestrated visits, but the central image was older. Sarah Chen Royce on her wedding day, laughing in front of the iron gates. Now Maris could see the echo of her own mother's smile. In Sarah's joy, the shared blood that had drawn her home before she knew why. "Your legacy, little one," she whispered to her daughter. "Art and earth, love and courage, all the colors of belonging." Outside, the September air held autumn's first crispness. The garden where they gathered was Sarah's and Maris's together now. Heritage roses climbing new trellises, ancient herbs mixing with fresh plantings, past and future growing wild and free. Reverend Grace waited beneath an arch twined with late-blooming morning glories. Pete stood with Calder, both men looking uncomfortable but proud in their suits. Elena took her place as matron of honor, accepting Sarah Margaret with practiced ease. The gathered community represented every thread of their woven life. Dr. Wilson, who'd brought Sarah Margaret safely into the world, Marion Hayes and her library, children's program participants, Harrison Bailey, standing awkwardly but earnestly with Thomas's paintings as his peace offering, Sheriff Matthews and Maggie and all the others who'd stood witness to love's quiet victory. But it was the unexpected guest who brought tears to Maris's eyes. Her mother, Margaret Chen, arrived from Seattle that morning after decades of self-imposed exile. Now she stood beside Elena, holding her granddaughter, her face soft with wonder at this bridge between past and future. "I spent so long running. From the past," she'd told Maris earlier, "from the pain of family rejection, from the ghost of my sister, Sarah's mother. Never imagined running away would lead you right back to where our story began." Calder's breath caught visibly when Maris appeared at the garden's entrance. She carried no traditional bouquet. Instead, she held one of Thomas's smaller paintings in her hands. As she reached Calder, she turned it to face their gathered family. The canvas showed these same mountains, this same valley, painted in Thomas's dreaming style. But in the foreground, he'd captured the ranch's iron gates with their climbing roses. The date in the corner was just weeks before his death. He'd known, somehow, where Maris's path would lead. "Today," Reverend Grace began, her voice carrying, "across the garden, we celebrate not just the union of two hearts, but the healing of many. The joining of families divided by time and circumstance, the growing of love in soil made richer by loss and hope and courage." The ceremony itself was simple, their vows as organic as the garden surrounding them. They spoke of choice and trust, of protecting freedom while nurturing bonds, of honoring the past while building something new. When Calder kissed his bride, Sarah Margaret chose that moment to crow with delight, setting off laughter that scattered the butterflies from Maris's late-blooming zinnias. Margaret Chen hugged her daughter with tears in her eyes, whispering, "Your father would have loved this place." The reception spread through garden and greenhouse, tables set with Eleanor's quilts as cloths, centerpieces combining Sarah's heritage flowers with Maris's new varieties. Harrison Bailey raised a quiet toast to Thomas's memory, his corporate facade cracking to show genuine grief and hope. As evening painted the mountains gold, Calder found Maris by Sarah's lilac bush, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Complete," she corrected, leaning into his embrace. "Look!" Above the garden, a rainbow arced across the valley, its colors touching mountain and meadow, ranch and river, all the wild places that had called her home. Sarah Margaret stirred, blinking up at her parents with eyes that held all their gathered. "Stories! Welcome to forever, little one," Maris whispered. "Welcome to a love as wide as the Montana sky and as deep as your garden's roots." The family portrait hung in the greenhouse classroom, sunlight catching its frame as children gathered for Maris's art conservation workshop. In the photograph, taken on Sarah Margaret's first birthday, 3 generations posed in the garden. Margaret Chen holding her granddaughter, Maris and Calder on either side, Elena and Pete included as chosen family, even Harrison Bailey looking almost relaxed among the blooming flowers. But it was the background that told their real story. The marriage of Sarah's heritage roses with Maris's new plantings, Thomas's paintings displayed on outdoor easels, and the ranch's iron gates standing proud with fresh forged roses climbing their ancient frame. "Ms. Chen showed me how to clean old paintings," young Tommy Matthews announced to his mother at pickup time, "just like she does at the big museum." His hands were stained with careful work, his eyes bright with discovery. The Seattle Museum's rural outreach program had exceeded all expectations. Twice a month, children from 3 counties gathered in the converted greenhouse to learn art conservation, botanical illustration, and the science of preserving beautiful things. Between sessions, Maris split her time between museum projects and the garden, while Sarah Margaret grew strong under the Montana sky. "She's walking the wolf trail again," Pete reported, joining Maris as the last students left. "Boss took her up to check the den sites. That little girl's got her daddy's way with wild things," Maris smiled, watching the sunset paint the mountains in colors Thomas would have loved to capture. Her daughter, not quite walking but army crawling, with determination, had inherited her father's gentle heart and her mother's fierce independence. The Baileys visited monthly now, bringing art books and stories, learning slowly that love grows better than control. The garden had flourished beyond anyone's dreams. Sarah's heritage seeds and Maris's innovative plantings created a showcase for agricultural preservation. Universities sent graduate students to study their techniques, while local farmers learned to save their own heirloom varieties. "The next generation," Elena often said, "will know where they come from, in their bones and in their gardens." As if summoned by the thought, Calder appeared on the trail, their daughter secured in a carrier on his chest. Sarah Margaret's dark curls caught the evening light, so like her namesakes, while her eyes held the wisdom of both her families. "Found wolf pups," she announced proudly, reaching for Maris. "3, like me." Maris took her daughter, breathing in the scent of sage and sunshine in her hair. "3 like you. How so, little one?" 3 families. Sarah Margaret held up fingers sticky with wild berries. "Bailey, Chen, Royce, all mine." Calder's laugh held. "The joy of hard-won peace. Can't argue with that logic." They walked together through the garden's evening beauty, past the classroom where children learned to preserve art and history, past the plots where heritage plants passed their stories through generations, past the iron gates that had first welcomed Maris home. The Montana sunset painted their world in shades of belonging, not the false gold of Bailey wealth, but the true richness of earth and art, love and legacy, wild hearts growing free in well-tended soil. Sarah Margaret fell, asleep as the first stars appeared, her small hands still stained with berry juice and art materials, her dreams colored by all the blooming possibilities of her unconventional family's love. And in the gentle night, the garden kept its ancient vigil, holding the stories of all who had tended it, Sarah's hope, Thomas's vision, Maris's courage, and Calder's healing, while new seeds took root, reaching always toward tomorrow's light.